So in this video we're going to talk about air brakes and the top 5 problems that you have with them. And here it's very cold outside, and I've had a lot of phone calls this week from different people that's had a lot of problems with certain things with their air brakes. And when it starts getting cold out and the temperature starts changing, they can really be a pain. So what I always tell people is you don't leave home without. And the first thing you don't leave home without is a self-lighting propane torch. Worth their weight in gold when you get a little fitting or something that's frozen up. The second thing is going to be airline antifreeze. I'm going to tell you all how this stuff works in just a minute. The third one is going to be a roll of black tape and some plastic tie straps. The fourth is going to be a 1/2-inch pipe coupling, a pair of 12-inch crescent wrenches, a park and brake release tool, a big piece of solid bar stock, preferably a little bit longer than this, but doesn't have to be, and a good sized hammer. The first part of it is going to be that your truck won't build any air. So you need to look around and walk up to the air compressor on the truck and see if the air compressor is building air. If you don't know what an air compressor looks like, these are all air compressors right here. Coming off the top of the air compressor is going to be a copper line. And open the hood and walk out there and feel that copper line and feel if it's hot. When the air compressor is pumping air, it's going to make that line hot. That's going to tell you that the compressor is pumping air, but yet it's going someplace and you really don't know where it's going. So go find your air dryer. Look at your air dryer and see if there's air coming out of the bottom of your air dryer. See if there's air coming out of the exhaust on the D2 governor. This is the D2 governor. Got to find out if it's not building air at all, if it's leaking someplace. And chances are it's going to be leaking air someplace, or usually at the bottom of the dryer it's just dumping it out on the ground. Go down there and put your hand underneath the bottom of the dryer and see if you feel air coming underneath the bottom of the dryer. Right here's the exhaust for the D2 governor. See if there's air coming out of that. Sometimes this bolts to the air compressor. Sometimes it's a little bitty guy and it's bolted to the air dryer. Everybody's different. You just got to go looking for it. But the D2 governor, this is what controls your air pressure. If you look at the end of it, when you take the cap off, sometimes they're push on, sometimes they thread on. You look at the end of it, you'll see a little 7/16 nut and a regular screwdriver slot. This is your air pressure adjustment. That adjusts your air pressure. 90, they're supposed to kick on. 120, they're supposed to kick out. This is your adjusting screw. So you just look and see if it's leaking air. Look at the bottom of the dryer and find out where it's leaking at, and you'll probably find your problem. The bottom of the dryer is the common place. The unloader on the bottom of the dryer is a very common place. It just dumps all its air out. That's what we use the 1/2-inch coupling for. If that valve is bad, you're not going to get home with it. You're going to have to take your coupling, and coming out of the bottom of your dryer on each side, you're going to have a number 10 JIC with a 1/2-inch thread that threads into the dryer on both sides. That's what this coupling's for. You take this coupling, you screw both of those fittings together, you run the line in and the line out, and that gets you home. You don't need that dryer to get home. Once that valve is opened in this kind of weather, you're not going to get it home. Put your coupling in there, you can get the truck home. Second thing is going to be it won't build enough air. That's number 2. It won't build enough air. So a lot of times what you can do is there'll be a little bit of ice in the line someplace. What I always do, let's say it's building 30 pounds of air. get in there and step on the brake pedal 50 or 60 times and just run all the air completely out of the truck, and then step on the throttle wide open and try to build your air again, and watch it and see, is the red and the green both coming together? The emergency and the service air, are they both building together? Pay attention to that. See if it climbed higher. Like the first time you had 30 pounds, you run the air down, now it builds 40 pounds. Run it down again. See if you can build 50 pounds and so on, because when that air is traveling through those lines, it starts warming things up. If it's frozen, you might get lucky. It might go ahead and build up to 120 pounds. You can get your truck home. But pay attention to it. The other thing that will cause you trouble is the D2 governor. This controls your air pressure. So a lot of times, what I would do is, I don't put a direct flame on it, but warm it up. If the truck's sitting there running, just warm it up with your torch just a little bit. See if it'll start building air again. Go in and run it down. Run the engine wide open, start building air again. Warm it up. See if that fixes your problem. A lot of times, that'll fix your problem. If it's the bottom of the dryer that's leaking, warm it up. See if it'll go ahead and take off just by warming it up. Be surprised what you can do with a torch and warming things up. Sometimes I'd shut the truck off, I'd go to the air compressor, I'd take the copper line, the discharge line off the air compressor, take a little bit of airline antifreeze. It's kind of hard to do, but raise your line up and try to pour some in that line on the discharge side. Screw your line back on, start your truck up, and that should push that airline antifreeze right down to your dryer. That works pretty good sometimes also. But either way, if it won't build enough air, that's a couple things you need to look for. The third one's going to be is you got a tractor trailer and you go to hook up to the trailer, or you release your trailer brakes and nothing happens. You're sitting there and you're tugging on the trailer, the brakes are locked on, you can't get your brakes off. The glad hands on the trailers, they just stay out in the weather like this all the time. Snow blows in the end of them, all kinds of bad things happen to them. If you hook up your glad hands and that trailer won't move, you need to take a little bit of airline antifreeze, take the lines coming from the tractor to the trailer, take them off, pour some down in there, stand it up a little bit, hook them up on both sides, the service and the emergency. Then go back in and release your brakes. See if it'll charge your trailer. If your trailer's charging with air, give it a minute, watch your air pressure gauge in the dash, see if they release. A lot of times, these glad hands are out in the weather, they get full of snow, they get full of moisture, and all kinds of bad things happen. Pay attention to that. The third one is that you get one or more of the duals locked up. Let's say you had one on the trailer or you had one on the tractor. The brakes are released, everything's trying to roll, but you've always got one or something someplace that's dragging, it's not wanting to release. So usually what happens is that the shoes are frozen to the drums. That's where this big long bar comes into play. You put this big long bar right down, if it's a Dayton wheel or something, you can go through the spokes on the outside, get it right on the brake drum, and give it some love taps. Make sure that you have your wheels chocked so that when that brake releases, or if you had your tractor brakes set and your trailer brakes released, make sure that it's not going to roll away, but that's usually what's happening. If you got one wheel, the shoes are frozen to the drum. Just reach in there and tap on that drum and you'll get yourself rolling again. Get her home. The next one is going to be if you have a service or emergency diaphragm that's leaking. That's going to be the last one. And the way that happens is you go to release your brakes and all your air falls off. You set your brakes, you build your air up, you release your brakes, all your air falls off. So that's a leak on the emergency side of the parking brake. The emergency side of the parking brake is the one that has the red hose going to it. And if you look at the parking brake bucket, it's the one that's closest to the end of the brake chamber. This one right here. This one releases your brake This is the service side. It applies your brake. This diaphragm, it's a 30-30 diaphragm. There's a diaphragm on this side, and there's a diaphragm on this side. If this diaphragm blows out, the air will leak out of these holes. So if you see the air leaking out of these holes, when you release your brakes, you know that the diaphragm inside the parking brake is blowed out. If you step on the brake pedal and you lose all your air, your service diaphragm is the one that has a hole in it, and it's where you're losing all your air. So either one of those two will make you lose your air with the brakes being released or when you apply your brakes. That's where this comes into play. So if you have a rubber hose or if you have a plastic hose, it doesn't matter. But what you need to do is eliminate that one brake so you can get it home. And the easiest way to do that is to take your parking brake tool, which is this one already is in here and it's already backed off. You put your parking brake tool in the hole in the back of it, you turn it about a quarter of a turn, pull back on it, and it will lock. When it locks, you run the bolt and the nut down and you start tightening it up. And as you tighten it up, it's going to pull that 2-ton spring back real nice and easy and release the brake. Once the brake gets released, then what you're going to want to do is you're going to have to deal with the air line. So what I do with them is I take them and I take the line off, bend it at 90 degrees like that, take your tie strap, run your tie strap around it, and tie it. And when you tie it like that, it's not going to leak. Take your black tape, run your black tape around it to make sure that it doesn't open up. Brakes backed off, take the truck home. The same with the rubber line. If you've got rubber lines feeding your parking brake, which a lot of them do have. A lot of them have rubber lines that go in here instead of plastic. They have rubber. If you have a rubber line, you do it the same way. Take the line off, kink it at 90 degrees like that, put your tie strap around it and tie it tight, and then take the tape and wrap the tape around it so it doesn't move. Tighten that tie strap up really tight. The plastic, it kinks it off 100%. The rubber, you really got to stay with that rubber and get it close and get it tight so that it doesn't leak. Once you get that, you can get it home. So a few things to watch along the way if you're having problems with something. Real simple. It'll get you home. If you get it home, you can always work on it when you get it home. We're going to talk about parking brakes for just a minute. Everybody doesn't understand how heavy of a spring is in here. That spring that's in there will kill you if you don't know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing with a parking brake, do not ever take that clamp off. Don't ever take that clamp off. If you don't know what you're doing, you don't take that clamp off. Use the tool and back the parking brake off, but don't ever take that clamp off. This tool, if you don't have them, you can see where this one's in here right now. This tool gets stowed in the parking brake itself. So it stows right here in the side. So when you're looking at the parking brake on the truck, unless somebody has stole it, that's what it's going to look like. It sits right there in the side of the parking brake. You take that loose, you take that out, and that's what you back your brake off with. Looks just like that when you have it installed. But if you don't know what you're doing, don't ever take that clamp off. The next thing we're going to talk about is going to be fittings. Let me get a fitting. If you're out on the road someplace and you get you're trying to get air back to something. Let's say you're trying to get air back to your trailer, and the air lines running back there, they're plastic. The first place that they freeze is where they hit a 90-degree brass fitting. So if you're looking around and you're trying to get your brakes to release, put some airline antifreeze in there first and try that. If that doesn't work, you go back and you start looking for a 90 in them lines, and just very briefly just warm that up just a little bit, not too much. You don't want to melt your plastic line. A lot of times they'll freeze right in a 90. When that moisture comes through that line and it hits that, that's where it'll freeze. Sometimes on the relay valves or the quick release valves, you'll see where the air comes in the top and the air comes out the bottom on both sides going to the brakes, the service side. You'll see where it's leaking out the bottom. The bottom's the exhaust. So your line comes in, it's got a little flapper valve in there. When the pressure hits the flapper valve, it pushes it down. It lets the air go to the brakes on both sides, and then when this air is dropped off, this moves up and it lets it exhaust out the bottom. So if it's exhausting out the bottom all the time, then you know that this little flapper valve in here is not functioning properly. That's a quick release valve. Every axle probably would have one of those where it dumps the air together. Steer axle, drive axle, trailer axles, all the above. So watch and make sure it's not dumping air out the bottom of the exhaust of the quick release valve. The last thing we want to talk about is preventive maintenance. Every year your dryer should be serviced. I service the dryers. I put the date on the dryer every year. If it's got a spin-on filter on the top of it, or if it's the whole desiccant pack where you buy the whole thing and you set it on top of there, you need to change that every year. You need to make sure you do that. The other thing you want to do is when it's warm outside, go underneath of the truck, trailer, take the drain valve and crack it open and make sure there's no moisture in those tanks. You don't want any moisture in those tanks. This stuff works, but this stuff is hard on all the O-rings and everything that are in these valves. When you go to release your brakes and you push your brakes in and release your brakes, all these O-rings that are in here, they're all pre-lubricated. This stuff here, it'll dry them out. So you really want to be careful. If you have to use it, you use it. But maintenance on your air dryer is priority. Drain your tanks. Make sure that you change that air dryer. Put the date on it so every time you walk by the air dryer and you look at it, it's been less than a year or right at a year. Good practice. Good practice. So now I got to put all this stuff away. I hope this helps you. I hope that you don't have too many problems, and maybe one of these days I'm going to make another one and I'm going to show you how to change a park and brake bucket safely. So, hope you liked the video. Thanks for watching.